All right, another weapon talks. I'm not gonna say weapon talks 3 because I've done way more of these videos than just the last 2. Specifically talking about weapons because weapons are something near and dear to my heart. They're a big part of any fantasy or basically any like media, that kind of thing. I like swords. All right, I don't know what to tell you. So had a little discussion about it in our group chats, and realistically there's a lot of ways to go about it, and it kind of depends on a few factors, like how far in the weeds do you want to get, and especially like if you're designing these kinds of things yourself, which I think at this point the majority of my videos are talking about designing stuff yourself, more or less, because that's kind of the goal, like just being a better designer. You know what? I'm gonna go right today because they're working on that main road, the pass-through road, and it's just all fucked up. So it's like, how far in the weeds do you want to get? And Baldur's Gate 3 got brought up, and I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3 I know, shoot me, for a lot of reasons. One, I don't have a whole lot of time to devote to just video games anymore, and if I'm going to play a video game, it's almost exclusively going to be some kind of more third-person, action-oriented game, and not only that, I haven't played many RPGs the last time I played a JRPG was like almost 20 years ago. Almost. It was like, I can't sit through JRPGs or RPGs anymore. I could probably play Baldur's Gate 3, but I just don't have that like wealth of time to devote to like a slow burn. But that's not what this is about. I'm not going to talk about why I don't play RPGs. In that game, there is some additional like weapon crunchiness that they added in, because Baldur's Gate 3 effectively does a lot of homebrew stuff. Like, they did a bunch of stuff to Ranger. They did a bunch of stuff. And one of the things going on is essentially weapons have access to a variety of what are essentially special moves. And generally what these do is they generally require at least an action. I haven't I haven't looked into them closely enough to see exactly how they interact with things like extra attack or something like that. But what they do is they're like once per short rest, which is very little. It's like, that's barely anything. So it's really just this extra thing you get, like an extra minor thing. And on top of that, what they do, they generally require an action. Some of them require some movement, a bonus action. It depends on exactly what it is. And they let you apply various effects. Like Baldur's Gate 3 has more status conditions, which is good. I like that. I have homebrewed a few little status conditions in like Site 27, and I don't think any of our other games really have that kind of idea, but it wouldn't be out of the question for any of the games we play in. But they'll do things like, okay, there's a lacerate ability that certain bladed weapons get, like long swords. I think almost any weapon that does slashing damage can do that, can utilize this. And it's like, you make an attack. I don't know if you do extra damage or a specific amount of damage. Like, I don't know exactly if it changes your weapon damage die. It seems more like it adds on to it, especially if it's once per short rest and it replaces your attacks. But not the point. Like, you either it reduces your damage to a specific, like to a D4 plus your strength or your dex or whatever, or it adds that on. It kind of doesn't matter. And it applies an extra effect. Target has to make a saving throw or start bleeding. I didn't look into how potent bleeding is. I don't know how good that is, but it applies a status effect, and that's generally the path a lot of these things take. There's like Pommel Strike, which adds, I think, a dazed condition, which is basically like you punching them in the gut. Which I don't see why you couldn't just punch them in the gut. I don't know why you need a pommel to do it. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. There's, like, for certain blunt weapons like Morning Stars and flails and maces and stuff, there's an ability called Tenacity, which lets you spend a reaction on a miss to just deal your ability modifier and damage, which that one's just the Graze ability from the Weapon Mastery system from 2024, which that one's already like kind of but needing to spend a reaction to do it is really meh. So, you know, but that's the thing, a lot of these are just like extra things kind of tacked on, and they also require you to be proficient in the weapon, because to me, in my mind, if you're not proficient in the weapon, you basically can't use it. Like, you can pick it up, but it's not a weapon to you. Like, you're not actually using the weapon. So that like goes out of the window as soon as I'm even considering these things. Like, if you're not proficient with the weapon, it doesn't exist to you. So, but one or two other abilities are kind of interesting to me, like the Cleave ability, which instead of the way the Cleave like kind of always or most commonly works, where usually if you kill a target, you get like the rest of your however much damage you did, however much damage it took to kill that target gets subtracted from your total, and then you can do any remaining damage to another target, which I think is a really boring and like overly analytical and mathematical way to figure out Cleave. And really, it's better if it's done in a way that's more like the Hunter Ranger's Whirlwind Attack or Baldur's Gate 3's Cleave. I like the way that one works, where it's, you can just do how was it? You can hit 3 targets within range of your weapon, and you deal I think half damage to them. So like, you roll the damage and then it gets cut in half. Now that's interesting, because mechanically, if you're doing half damage, you know, you're pumping out the same raw damage numbers. If you're hitting at least 2 targets, you're dealing the same amount of raw damage to the general enemy health pool. But if you're hitting 3 targets, then you're dealing 150% damage, and that's actually like kind of worth it. Whereas looking at something like the Hunter Ranger's Whirlwind ability, before you get extra attack, this is generally good. But I think you get it way after you get extra attack. So unless you're attacking more than like 4 targets, mathematically it's not worth it. And tactically, you always want to be focusing on a single target anyway. So on top of that, it's not worth it. So really, you want to be doing way more extra damage than you could be doing to a single target with something like this. And that's kind of the angle I'm approaching a lot of this as. Why would I use these extra abilities over just swinging my weapon twice? especially if they don't combine with extra attack. If a lot of them do combine with extra attack, then a lot of my concerns are less, and these kind of become more like, I'm gonna do my special move once per turn and then just get a regular attack, which I think is an okay way to go about it. Like, if you're just gonna call it, like, let's just call these special moves for now. Like, you're gonna do one special move and then your regular attack. If these are kind of free use, like you don't get if you can do these at will, then they can't be particularly powerful, and they can't be better, quote, than your regular attack. So it would be, if they're completely at will, it would probably have to be something like, okay, you can, with a bladed weapon, you can try to apply a bleeding effect once per turn, or maybe like, once per action maybe, so that the fighter gets a little better with them. And they can do 2 of them with Action Surge, which I really like the replace a single attack kind of approach to special move design. Like, I really liked that for the Dragonborn Breath weapon. That was really fun. So let's approach it from that angle for now. If they're at will and they replace one attack, they kind of have to be worse for raw damage than a regular attack. Why is that? Well, because it's, decision points, and like sometimes you want to just use regular attacks over applying whatever this is. Like, maybe you're fighting a target with like really, really high constitution saves, so it has a really it has a really high chance of succeeding against your lacerating attack. That's an idea. Or maybe, but then theoretically, a lot of things in media that you may want to apply bleeding effects to, like beasts from Bloodborne, or maybe from trolls, like D&D trolls, like they have this regeneration feature, and acid and fire is one of the main ways to hamper that ability. And it's something Bloodborne beasts do as well. But maybe for trolls, bleeding them could be a useful way of hampering their regeneration as well. So that's an idea. But maybe, they have like good constitution saves. So maybe you bake something into trolls where they have, disadvantage on saves against bleeding. I don't know. Or maybe just their regeneration works to stop the bleeding first, then they regenerate. So while they don't have an actual out-and-out weakness to it, it does get in the way of their normal mechanics. So it becomes useful. Or something like Bloodborne, where in Bloodborne there's no bleeding status effect, but sawtoothed weapons, or saw weapons, create ragged, heavily bleeding wounds, which is kind of implied to interfere with their regeneration and therefore be a more damaging method of causing damage. So maybe it could be something like that. In Bloodborne, because there's no bleeding status effect, it's really just you do extra damage. So, maybe it can be something like that. Maybe there's enemies that don't necessarily have high constitution modifiers, or maybe they do have high con, but they just have high vulnerability to bleed. Whether that's disadvantage on the save, whether that's just they take a massive amount of additional damage from bleeding effects. Could be something like that. Why is the director of the company 20 minutes late? Could be a variety of things like that. And that's just around the bleeding status effect. But so maybe you deal reduced damage. Like, say if you're using a longsword, your die steps down 1 or 2 thresholds. So it goes from a D8 to a D10, or It goes from a D8 to a D4, or if you're using it two-handed, it goes from a D10 to a D6. Or if you're using a scimitar, that could have access to something like this. It goes down from a D6 to 1. You just deal 1 damage, plus your ability mod. That could be something. That could be, there's some decision points. Like, do you want to give up potential damage in exchange, or do you want to give, potential damage on your weapon attack itself for potential bleeding damage that hampers the opponent in a different way? That could be something. Or for any of the other properties, like, do you want to do like dazed and off balance and weak grip status effects in exchange for lower direct damage? And especially if they're at will, then they would need to be weaker, like I said, and once per round, or once per turn, maybe. And you can't, maybe once per turn on your turn. So you can't do them as, reaction opportunity attacks. Something like that is, I think, a fine way to approach it. Something like weapon special moves. But then, how do you tie in proficiency bonus? Something I talked about before. Maybe you can learn a number of these equal to your proficiency bonus, or for the special moves that require a saving throw, your proficiency bonus is baked into it, because the DCs for those are 8 plus your ability mod plus proficiency bonus, usually plus any weapon magical bonus. So it's baked right in there. But for something like cleave, maybe you can hit a number of targets equal to your proficiency bonus. So at low levels, it's +2. And as you get higher, it goes to +3, +4, +5, +6. So at higher levels, you do a cleave attack, you can hit 6 targets. And that's a boatload of extra damage, even if you're dealing half damage on your strike. And especially, usually at higher levels, you're going to have big, you're going to have some kind of extra modifier on your weapons. Like in our Night Parade game, everybody's got a weapon that does at least an extra 2d6 damage. My character has 4d6 because 1 is the Barbarian and blah, blah, blah. Now, that would be fucking crazy. If he's surrounded by 6 targets, he can cleave to attack 6 targets and deal, half of his regular weapon damage, but the full 4d6 to everybody? Damn, that would be juicy. And still, I think in a lot of cases, relatively balanced, because most of the time, if you're fighting like a bunch of dudes, they're not going to have a whole lot of hit points, but they're still not going to go down to a single attack like that. He could cleave his way through big groups, but he's still taking maybe 2-3 turns to kill enemies that even have 30 HP. Because he'd be dealing his basic weapon damage would be, I'm going to apply rage as basic weapon damage, so that's going to get cut in half. Well, maybe. I'll leave rage out for now. So either it's for him, it would be a D6 or a D12 plus his 7 strength plus 3 for the magic bonus on the scythe, plus another 3 for rage. So that's what? 10 extra damage plus rage, plus 6.5. What is that? Fucking 6.5 plus 7, that's 13.5 right there, plus 3. 16.5 plus rage is 19.5, almost 20 damage. So cut in half, it's dealing 10 damage, and then it's 14 for the 4d6. So if he's dealing, around 24 damage to each individual target versus almost 30-ish damage to a single target. So like 24-ish damage to 6 targets, yeah, that's still not enough to kill targets that even have 30 HP. So he could deal like all that damage, 24 damage to a bunch of dudes, and then hit one guy and finish them off. Then next turn, he could finish off that group and then move up, like something like that. That I think would be really cool. Allow the DM to use a bunch of dudes all at once, and even with something like this, he's not killing them all in one turn. I find I'm really liking that idea of cleave, and I might give stuff like this to my Site 27 party. Options like this, I'll think about it just to test them out. But then, so something like this could be really cool. That said, moving on, I don't really like the 2024 weapon masteries all that much. They feel really basic. You don't get many of them. I do like the idea of specializing in a weapon, though. I do like that idea. So, touching back on what I talked about in the first video, or not first, but the video 2 videos ago on this kind of idea, where it's like there are more passive effects, you know, to represent like what weapons are just generally good at. Something like, you know, swords get an extra, they get a small bonus to AC, like they can parry more effectively. And that's something that swords are good at. They're good at the more passive defense. And you can do the bigger dramatic parry, where, you know, you knock your opponent's weapon out of the way in a more dramatic fashion and possibly get a riposte. So that could be something. They, like, swords get an ability called parry and riposte, where you can spend your reaction to add something to your AC, and if that causes an attack to miss, then you can get one weapon to attack as part of the reaction. That sounds really cool for swords. Something like basically any weapon that in real life has their center of balance closer to your hand, so you have more control. That would be something cool for swords. Something like axes don't have that capability. Maces, anything where the center of gravity is out farther. Now, any two-handed weapon might have something like that, but we'll consider that. But like I'm considering weapons into 2 broader categories, where it's, you know, close to your hand and far away from your hand. Whereas something like an axe would get something like a crushing blow, where there's a lot of momentum behind your swing, and with an axe you can blow through something like a parry attempt, maybe. I don't know exactly how that would work, but like, I don't know. Maybe if your opponent tries to parry you and you're using an axe, you know, they don't get that bonus to their AC. Like, you just ignore it. Something like that. It's an idea. Maybe I'll write down some ideas I have. But, you know, that's all I got for today.